Listen only mode.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. It's Nicola Beadle here, author of Surviving Your Year Abroad. I'm here today with Anton, who's our last panellist of the day. He's another one of the great people who's been involved in Surviving Your Year Abroad from the very beginning. And he went to the US on study abroad, and he's going to talk to us about that today. So hi Anton.
Hi.
Hi, so if you just want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to go on a year abroad.
Okay, so I'm currently a third-year student at Manchester studying politics. I guess the reason I wanted to study abroad was in my youth I lived abroad in a few places. And I also took a year out before I started university, and just sort of got a taste for different cultures, different experiences. As for studying abroad, I wasn't really aware of it before too soon before I arrived. I didn't know it was an option until after I'd actually applied for the course. It was a cousin of mine at Warwick that I heard had applied to do something like that, and when I heard about it, I thought, if that's available, it's something I'd definitely be interested in.
Right.
As for why it was the US, I don't know. I've always had a particular interest in sort of the US and the culture, and
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I've seen a few American Pie movies or something like that. But it's always had a certain a pull for me, a certain attraction, and yeah, ever since I found out it was an option, it was always something I really wanted to do.
So you didn't actually find out it was an option from your university per se?
I found, I mean, I looked into it after I discovered that as I said, my cousin had tried to do something like that at his university. So when I was actually going through UCAS and applying to universities, it wasn't a consideration at all. I mean, I didn't even really think about it.
Right.
But once it, became apparent to me that something like that was possible, when I started in first year, I sort of kept my eyes open to it and, made sure that when there were talks and information sessions about that I attended everything and kept informed.
Okay, and did you find that year abroad was a positive experience?
Oh, certainly so. Completely positive. I mean, I can't find any serious drawbacks to it, for me personally at least.
And how did it compare to those American Pie films?
True for the most part. I mean, I think it will probably depend on what university in America you go to, but a lot of the stereotypes are true about, red Solo cups and kegs and beer pong and all that stuff.
Wow, that must have been an experience, to say the least.
It was incredible.
And so how did it sort of compare studying abroad from when you've lived out of and been on your gap year before you started university? Was it different in any way?
Yeah. I mean, just the nature of it. Although in terms of experiences, it was quite similar. As in, every week you're going to be trying something different and wanting to make the most of what's available. Because you're studying, there's a lot more structure to it. There's days in class and there at a certain time, and your week to week it's a lot more structured. Whereas being in a gap year environment, you're free to do whatever you want and go wherever you want.
Yeah.
Which I guess can be a plus or a negative depending on how organised you are and how confident you are going out on your own.
And how did you find actually studying in the US? Was it very different? What were the lecture structures like? What about assessments as well?
Yeah, it's completely different to the UK. I mean, again, there's a certain degree of difference between subjects, but for me, doing politics, a social science, humanities subject, normally over here I'm doing maybe one or two essays per subject and then an exam at the end, which counts for most of the mark. Over there it's regular testing, regular readings, there's more class time, smaller classes, fewer big exams and big papers, and you've got midterms as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they basically split up a lot more of the assessment, and it's a lot more focused on regular reading and interaction. Some compare it more to sixth form, but again, depends on your style of learning. For me personally, it worked better because I tend to be keeping up more with reading, and therefore I sort of get more marks for it, whereas in the UK people can spend 6 weeks not going to any lectures, pull an essay out the bag at the last minute and get a good grade, whereas if you're not doing work regularly over there, then it'll show.
Right, okay, so did you find it was maybe the workload was a bit more?
Yeah, I'd say the workload was heavier.
Yeah.
The work itself was probably easier.
Right, okay. And how did that sort of transfer back to your grades here in the
UK? They've got a specific, they've got what they call guidelines in transferring the grades.
Mm-hmm.
It's not made very clear, to be honest, and I mean they say, oh, we'll take into consideration the course that you're studying, the fact, they'll take into consideration the fact that there are adjustments that have to be made because you're abroad and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't particularly pleased with how my grades translated.
Right.
Because comparing them with people that did similar subjects, their grades seemed to be converted back higher, but because they weren't doing exactly the same subject, and each department's got its own guidelines,
Yeah.
there wasn't really room for me to have a grievance for it. It's all a bit sort of, this is how it's done, but not really clear what the criteria are.
Mm. Was that on the part of the university in the US or back here at home?
But back here.
Okay, so that's just your university's way of sort of doing things. And what about choosing modules and things like that? Did you get a choice, and how did that work, enrolling on those?
Yeah, so basically in Manchester we've got what they call a study abroad advisor,
Mm-hmm.
and this is set according to the subject that you're studying, and you have to, across the year you have to meet certain core modules. Now it just so happened that my core modules were all in first term, so they were all covered, and basically had to take on subjects at the appropriate level and an appropriate degree of relevance to my degree.
Yeah.
But because it's politics, there's a decent amount of freedom in what I could choose.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as the study abroad advisor signed it off, then it was okay for me to do. So for example, I was able to do a journalism course of a lower level than normal,
Mm-hmm.
Because it was signed off, and because one of our modules ran over the course of the year, so I was doing an essay that was due for Manchester whilst I was over there. They allowed me to take on an easier module in America to sort of compensate for the extra workload.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And what about meeting people at the university? A lot of people who went to the US, sort of when I was interviewing, were saying the culture is quite different there in sort of university life. So I just wonder if you could speak about that a little bit. How did you find it?
I find it alright personally. You just sort of have to be confident in putting yourself out there.
Mm-hmm. How is it different to being here?
I didn't find it all that different. I mean, certainly in the way that I found in first year in England, a lot of the friends that I made were those that I was living with in halls.
Yeah.
It was pretty similar in that way over there.
Mm-hmm.
But in the fact that because you're a study abroad student and coming in, it can be that you find yourself in halls that aren't that sociable, and so that can be a difficulty in making friends. But I mean, as I say, you've just got to be confident in speaking to people in all sorts of settings, whether it be in your halls, in classes, in extracurricular groups, you know, in the societies that you join. I didn't find it a whole lot different to over here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of hard to say because coming in as a first year at the same time as everyone else over here, and coming in as a student halfway through the year in America, kind of, it's obviously going to be a bit more difficult because you come in the middle of the year and, you know, friendships have already been made and so on.
Yeah, definitely. And then, so you just mentioned there about halls and things like that. Were you placed in halls, or did you get a choice of where to go?
Well, we had a choice. Well, they said we had a choice. On our accommodation application, we had to put down a sort of ranking list of where we'd want to stay, and we were given a good amount of information from Manchester Study Abroad unit about sort of from past students about what the different places were like.
Yeah.
I unfortunately was placed in sort of the last halls that I wanted to be placed in.
Right.
The last possible place I wanted to go to, which was a very quiet halls, very study orientated, and it was also an all-male dorm.
Right.
Which was, you know, wasn't great for socialising and meeting people. Fortunately, though, they have a process where you can apply to move, and by the third week, I'd managed to move into, you know, one of the two halls that I'd originally applied to.
Oh, brilliant!
It worked out in the end.
Yeah, definitely. And then, so you obviously have that difficulty of being in a quiet place. For those first few weeks before you moved, how did you go about meeting people who weren't in your halls, per se?
Yeah, well, it was quite good because the international programs office at UMass was quite well organised. In the first few weeks, they put on quite a few sort of meet and greet events and whatnot. And so I met. There was also a lot of other people from Manchester, and the group of internationals formed quite a strong group. So met people that way. Although it wasn't Americans, it was, you know, it was new people.
Yeah.
And they also had, you know, what they called a buddy system, which was where they put you in touch with an American that had previously done study abroad.
Yeah.
So I met up with this guy and met some of his friends.
Yeah.
And sort of the fact that you can start with a smaller group of people and then just branching out from the people that they meet, you know, worked out quite well. Even if I wasn't, even if I didn't know that many people, sort of as a first contact, through friends of friends, basically, was initially how I got to meet more people.
Yeah, because I think a lot of year abroad, future year abroad students who are just about to go out, they worry about not making friends. You know, I'm in the place on my own. How am I going to meet people? But it just ends up happening. You just meet people. It sounds silly, but you just end up meeting people, and I think that's something really important. They should know that you shouldn't worry about anything like that because it just happens.
Yeah, but I'd also say though on that note is that just the best way to do it is to put yourself. I mean, there are going to be people that go out there that are a bit more nervous about talking to people, a bit more introverted. The best, I mean, my personal belief is put yourself in situations where you have to, you know, social interaction is forced. So join as many clubs and sports clubs and societies and extracurricular groups as possible to meet people. The buddy system is always good. You might get on with them, you might not. You know, be active in the international programs to meet some of the international people. The more of these groups and organisations that you get yourself involved in, the more people you're going to meet. And just out of you know probability, more people you meet, the more people you're likely to make friends with.
Yeah, definitely. Was that something you did? Did you get involved quite a lot with the societies and clubs?
I should have done,
Okay.
but as I say, I was fortunate enough that from the off, the internationals, the other internationals, we formed quite a strong group. So I was quite happy. But it was definitely something at the start that I was considering, and I know some friends did join. Some friends joined like the rugby team, and we made a little football team with people in other halls, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, although I personally didn't do it, I know people that did. And
And
certainly,
they benefited. And what was the city like where you were?
I was on a campus,
Okay.
so the nearest place we had was a small town. I mean, I had the basic amenities. I had a small cinema, a couple of restaurants, a few bars, but for the most part, most of what went on was on campus or just off it.
Right, okay, so everybody sort of tends to stay on campus.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And what about free time? Did you have a lot of free time out there? And if so, what did you do with it?
Free time sort of during term, or?
Yeah, during term.
Yeah, I had a reasonable amount of free time. Tried to get the work. As I say, the workload was heavier, but not that hard, so it was quite easy to get through quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did we do? We did trips on the weekend to New York and Boston.
Wow.
We set up a sort of six-a-side football team, which we did.
Yeah.
Went to the gym quite regularly because they had really good facilities there. And then apart from that, just sort of the normal student stuff, you know, just chilling out with friends, watching films, just throwing a ball around in the sort of green areas on campus.
Brilliant. And just thinking back, it must feel like a long time ago now, especially with you being in final year, but what was your very first day like?
The very first day was interesting. It was snowing. Well, it snowed quite heavily, and I had some issues getting into my accommodation.
Right.
And I bumped into one of the first people who was also an international, an Australian guy. And I know it was all very surreal, really. Just sort of going to the dining commons and seeing how it all worked,
Yeah.
and then having the talks and just sort of meeting people. It was all a bit of a blur, really. Sort of very surreal, but definitely exciting as well. That you're on the verge of, you know, a great experience.
Yeah, definitely. And the year ahead with all the anticipation and everything. How did you cope with jet lag?
I don't personally think I'm affected by it too strongly, but I like to lie in, so that's usually my remedy.
And so those the first week or so, did you give yourself time before lessons started? Did you have to be there by a certain date? How did that work?
We had to. Oh, it was a bit of a nightmare for me, really. They were very strict on the amount of the window that we had to move into our halls,
Right.
and not realising this, I'd booked my flight beforehand, and it was assuming I'd have enough time to get there, but I hadn't factored in sort of wait times for buses,
Right.
and I realised I wasn't going to be able to get there in time. In fact, I was going to arrive a day early, and I was looking at hotels, and I was thinking, oh, this is going to cost me an arm and a leg. What I'd actually done, I'd set up a Facebook group of all the people going from Manchester to UMass, and that included the people that were already there and also a couple of students that were from UMass at Manchester at the time. And so one of them got in touch with me and said, look, if you need a place to crash, I'm going to be moving in on that day. My halls are open. You can sleep on our sofa bed. So I was able to crash on his sofa bed in his halls the night before, and met him at the airport, actually, because he was on the same flight as me.
Oh,
And then, yeah, slept over there, and that was when we had the first day. And then I think that was the preceding weekend before classes. So we had, I think, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday before classes started on the Monday.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant. And what would you say? What would you say the main differences were culturally?
I can't hear you very well. You've got a bit of background noise going on.
Okay, is that a bit better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's much better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Culturally, what sort of things did you find were quite different over there?
Culturally, I'd probably say attitudes and interactions with drugs and alcohol. Certainly, there's a lot more marijuana being smoked out there. Not that it's not the case over here, but it seems to be a lot more widespread over there, a lot more accepted. And of course, with the regulation of the law of being 21 for drinking alcohol, how you go about, social wise and parties at the weekend is different, whereas here it's bars and nightclubs. Over there it's, you've got to put much more effort into finding house parties and stuff like that. But culturally, broadly speaking, it's not a million miles away, which I guess was one of the attractions, that it wouldn't take too much to adjust to America.
Oh, brilliant. And were there any moments where, I imagine you probably didn't feel like this with you having lived abroad before, but were there any moments when you missed home or missed friends at home who were maybe graduating, things like that? How did you manage with that? What did you do?
There were times. I mean, again, I wouldn't, for the most part, I'm not particularly sensitive to homesick, as you say, having been abroad, but there were moments sort of when I was a bit quieter and had a bit of time to think about things where I was a bit homesick, and I'd definitely say Skype helps with that, and Facebook as well. I mean, I Skype my parents and my grandparents and some friends occasionally, and I kept a sort of blog or / diary or whatever you want to call it, a thread going on Facebook to sort of keep friends back home updated with what was going on and allow them to sort of, at the same time, put questions and comments to me and whatever. So I definitely think that helped. And then sort of, I mean, for people that felt homesick, I definitely felt it helped to have English people surrounding you at times, because in that way, you can talk about things from home, home comforts, and I know some of the girls out there from England had, care packages with PG tips and Cadbury's and whatever sent over.
Yeah.
So having people from home to like talk about things and, reminisce about home helps to sort of put your mind at ease if you feel a bit homesick.
Brilliant. And did you come home at Christmas, or did you decide to stay out there?
Well, I was there from January to June, so I didn't come back at all whilst I was away.
Brilliant, brilliant. And what would you say to someone who was going to do the same year abroad as you, so who was going to go to UMass and everything?
What would I say?
What your advice or something like that?
My advice? I mean, prepare and do your research beforehand, so you know what you're getting yourself into, and you know what the costs are going to be, and what you have to be aware of, and what you have to look out for, so you don't get any surprises. I think doing your research certainly. Sorry.
Things you just mentioned, things that make sure you research things. What kind of things?
Well, for example, accommodation. So you feel that you're applying to a sort of place where you'll fit in and has got what you want. I mean, also costs. definitely, so you can budget appropriately, and just how the university operates, because often if you've only been at one institution, you can sort of not fathom that, oh, this is how things are done differently in a different place, for like course registrations or how the food on campus works, so that you're not a bit overwhelmed when you get there, and that you don't miss out on courses or not have any money on your food card or whatever and stuff like that. I think definitely doing your research can help you to settle in a lot better and a lot faster and with fewer mishaps. But then on the flip side of things, just go in with an open mind, really be willing to put yourself out there and try new experiences, really just try whatever comes your way and try your hand at everything.
Brilliant. And just one final question, and that's, would you recommend it?
Would I recommend it? Undoubtedly, 100%.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Anton, for being with us today. We really, really appreciate it. It's not always easy to get people involved in something like this. So thank you very much.
No problem.
And for everybody else, we're back tomorrow, where we're speaking to Beth, who went to France, and also we're speaking to Chris Perry from Student Money and Me, all about finance out here abroad. So I'll see you tomorrow.